Welcome to the Compassionate Newsroom podcast. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston Lemon. I'm a former television reporter and news director turned happiness scholar. I train news leaders and journalists internationally to foster workplace well-being, resilience, and a positive culture in their newsrooms. Every week, I'll bring you evidence-based strategies and inspiring interviews from news leaders, journalists, and experts worldwide who prioritize the mental health of their teams and themselves. Let's redefine what it means to lead with compassion in journalism, one episode at a time. Happy Wellbeing Wednesday. I'm so happy that you're here. Let's go back. And I mean back into my television news days when I was a television reporter many moons ago, and I was always on the lookout for training to help me grow. And there was one place that was the gold standard for journalists. And it's still the gold standard, and that's Poynter. Now, this was back when their training was on, are you ready for it? When their training was on VHS tapes. Yes, I said it. It's that long ago. And I believe if I went to my parents' home, start going through their garage, I might just find a tape or two or three. And I will tell you that today I'm so thrilled to welcome someone very special from Poynter, someone that I'm lucky to call a friend. Kerwin Speight is an Emmy and Edward R. Murrow award-winning journalist with more than 20 years of experience in the industry. He has led teams at Revolt, Black News, and Spectrum News in Charlotte, North Carolina, and his reputation as an empathetic leader, it's truly inspiring. Kerwin joins us in the Compassionate Newsroom studio to share his approach to leading with empathy and how he maintains his own well-being while supporting his team when he worked in news. And he also tells us a little bit more about what we can do to leverage Poynter when it comes down to our well-being as well. I can't wait for you to hear from him. So let me get out of the way. Let's dive in. Wow. I can't believe this. I'm talking to Kerwin.
The one and only, right?
The one and only. I'm so super excited. And plus, Kerwin is one of the first news leaders I am interviewing as it relates to the Compassionate Newsroom podcast. And you know what? For me, it's so sweet because of the fact that the history that you and I have.
Yes.
We worked together at North Carolina A&T. And guys, the day he left, I was so sad because he's just that incredible. And just really treasure your work in the industry in various markets, from all over, from New York to DC. I mean, the list goes on and on. Yes. And now you are at Poynter, and Poynter is one lucky institution to have Kerwin there, and so grateful that you're on the podcast to talk about compassionate newsroom and really leadership and the value of it.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Excellent. So let's talk about, before I kind of dive into your style as a leader, some advice that you can give to news leaders, and then of course talk about all things Poynter. And some initiatives that Poynter may be having as it relates to this topic. I'm so curious, Kerwin, tell me about a news leader that was really influential for you as a leader.
I would probably say it was one of my first news directors, Michelle Butt. At the time, she was news director at WBAL TV in Baltimore. I was a producer there. Currently, she is the general manager of WXII TV in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And she just spoke my language. We had this connection to North Carolina. My mom's family from North Carolina. She was born and raised in North Carolina and had worked there before. I was a producer. She was a former producer. So we spoke the same language in terms of understanding journalism, understanding TV news, understanding strategy, and then also understanding the room. And understanding the people who you work with, and what motivates them, and understanding what the room needs. And she was very, very good about that. And that was one of the critical things that I learned from her even as we talked shop and as we talked shows and as we talked ratings and as we talked viewer retention, we also talked about her ability to kind of reach everybody in the room.
Wow. How did she do that? How did she go about reaching everyone, especially in a newsroom?
It was interesting. She talked to people, and so whether it was folks who stopped by her office or whether she came out to the newsroom and sat in the producer pod, and as people were walking by, she would say, "Hey, John, come talk to me." She was a field producer at one point, so she had been out in the field early in her career, so could also relate to people who didn't sit in the newsroom all day. Photographers. She just has this knack for people and a knack for talking and a knack for stories, and I think that in part is what helped make her successful as a leader, news leader.
That's interesting that you say that, because when I worked as a news director, one of the things that really helped me with connecting with my team was the more conversations we had. Yeah. And outside of the typical meetings, right? In terms of that, just having those conversations, being able to connect. Yeah. And I'm also curious as it relates to how she supported the well-being of your newsroom. What did that look like?
Sure. So I think it was, there were a number of things that I recall at that time. Families who had children, she would send a meal home to them, wow. Be it the mom employee or dad employee, didn't matter. And there was always this little onesie, WALTV onesie, that kind of made it nice and sweet.
Yeah.
There were often times when we would just take a beat. At the time in Baltimore, we were really kind of hitting spot news hard. Mm-hmm. And, it would come often, it would come fast, it would come furious. Some days we felt we were drowning, just in spot news that we needed to cover. And she was very good about saying, let's take a break. Let's step back from it all. Let's process it all. And this was in the early 2000s. So this was, well before, we really, 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 really started talking about, mental health, empathy, and compassions in newsrooms on a large scale.
Excellent. That says a lot. The fact that at that stage, right? Because I feel like workplace well-being is something that we're talking more about now, right, in news. But for a long time, we were silent. That was something, right, that we didn't really hit on too much. So it sounds like to me, on so many different levels, how she was so, progressive and obviously operated with a level of care. Yeah. Authentic care. Tell us about your style as a leader. What does that look like to you?
I think it's changed over time, and it has changed, based on where I've been. I don't know if this is a real term, but I'm a situational leader. Who does what we do, why we do it, what the mission is, and everybody kind of knows their place in it. And then I've been in some where it's just kind of been, we do whatever. A lot of times as a leader, you kind of know what's your job, what's your role, what's the mission, what am I here to do, and how do I get the folks in the room to do the same, right? How do I get the folks in the room to understand, what the goals are, what the mission is, and what success looks like. So it's really situational. One of my roles when I was the managing director of the Spectrum Newsroom in Charlotte, there was a format change, and I walked into that where there was just a lot of stuff that had to be done pretty quickly. We were hiring a lot of people. We were really changing the model away from covering a lot of spot news, if you will, mm-hmm. And really kind of telling more character-driven, centric stories. If there was a spot news, crime of the day, if you will, we really had to think about, okay, why are we going to cover this? Are we going to cover a car crash? What's the reason? And it was very hard. And a lot of people kind of didn't understand that. They wanted to be live on the scene every day. It's like, well, that's kind of what we do, right? We've got 5 other TV stations in the market that are doing that. We've really got to carve out our niche and establish ourselves. So, back to your original question, it really is a situational leader, and some folks can do it and they just need the encouragement and the pat on the back, and the other folks need you to kind of spell it out for them and help them along the way.
Interesting, because a couple of things stood out. But first question I'm going to ask you as it relates to what you shared concerning your time at Spectrum and then talking about situational leadership, which I love. I love that. Tell me about a situation that you've had in a newsroom that has been the most challenging, but yet when you look back at it now, how rewarding it was once you've met it.
I would say by far, when I managed the Spectrum newsroom, that was probably the most challenging role. One, I started in the middle of the pandemic. So the pandemic started, I guess, in March of 2020. I started in November, right after the election. We didn't even officially have a president. And so I started at that time. And so everybody was, on edge, if you will, with pandemic concerns. And then you have this new leader coming into the newsroom. And then you have a new format, and you have new roles. So that was by far the most challenging. Some of the successes there, when I look back on it, local stations, measure ratings, if you will. And Spectrum has engagement, which is a formula that they come up with, based on how many people are watching cable and how many people stream and how many people view content online, and they come up with a score. And for the first time, in station history, we were number one, and that had never happened before, right? And
Wow.
and that happened, within the first year. But looking back on it, there were so many other things and so many other trying things that happened, that I didn't really celebrate it. I mean, we celebrated with the team, but I look back on that success. I look back on really having the right people in the room and really helping people understand, like this is the vision. Here's where we're going, and here's why we're doing it. And there was resistance. Some of the other things that I look back on, I think I look back on my growth as a leader, where I come from newsrooms where it was pretty much, here's the deal, let's do it, right? Where it took a little bit more empathy, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more conversation or conversations, with people to really help them understand this is our mission. This is why we're here. This is what we're doing.
Wow. Well, being a change agent, and I can
Very
relate
hard.
to that. Yeah,
Very
it
hard.
is very challenging.
Yes.
And you talked about empathy as relates to your team, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But before I do, I want to know, especially as a person who was hired in news, serving as a change agent, how did you take care of you? How did you take care of yourself?
It's interesting. Looking back on it, I probably could have done a much better job of it. But some of it is the things that we know that we can do, like go to the gym. I found a true love for hot yoga, where you can just kind of sit in a space and let it all, kind of come out peacefully. If you
Yes.
really found a love for that. I also got into journaling, really at the end of the day, or in the morning, writing down my feelings. So not writing down, here's what I did today. Here's what I did today. Here's what we accomplished. Here's the conversations that I had. But, really taking the time to journal, just reflect, here are the things that I'm thankful for. Here's the things that I wish that I did differently. I'm happy about this. I'm excited because, so-and-so's birthday is this weekend and we're going to hang out. And then I think the other part is, doing something that you love, and I like to shop. And not that I have the money to shop, but, I had a bargain shop, but, really, taking that and finding deals and finding bargains, all of that combined, really helped me mentally, my well-being and such.
I love it. First off, it's nothing like retail therapy. So I certainly agree in terms of that. And one of the things I really love that you shared, another thing that we have in common happens to be the practice of gratitude. I mean, There's so much great research as relates to how it can help with our stress levels. And it can even help with our sleep. When I'm training news leaders, I often share the value of what it can do, not only for themselves, but also for their team. Right. So it's wonderful to see what you've constructed for yourself in regards to your self-care strategy in terms of your well-being. So I'm curious, when you mentioned earlier, and you talked about empathy and being able to be empathetic towards your team, what does that look like in regards to your leadership style?
Sure. uh, I'll look back at some situations where we've had, when I was the managing director of Spectrum, we had folks who weren't quite performing the level of what was expected. And it involved having a conversation with them, generally, how are things going? You are struggling to meet and I think at the time the weekly requirement, 3 stories for a multimedia journalist. It's like, okay, so what's happening that you can't get this done? And a little bit of it is peeling back the layers of just listening, right, to what's happening and what's going on. And then looking for opportunities to say, are you using the resources that are available to you? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then at the end of that, helping them understand, that you are having said issues, be it personal, be it you're new to the market and don't really know people. And I understand that, but here's what we want to do. Here's where you need to be and how can we help you get there? And so that is an example, of being empathetic versus, you're not meeting the weekly requirement. If you don't do it,
Mm-hmm.
we have another conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that you, as a leader, really operate on a level of care, right?
Yep.
It's making sure that your members of your team are well. And another thing that I really value that is also very important to remember is how can I support you? And then you mentioned the importance of the resources that you have.
Right.
And that's something that is very instrumental. And I think it's also important for news organizations, especially leaders, to also make sure that they understand the value of that, right? And knowing what those resources are,
right.
So you're able to share it with your team. So,
right.
So many great things that you've done as it relates to a compassionate leader.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that too. When I was at Spectrum and it was during the pandemic, our multimedia journalists were remote. They were all remote, and they could come into the building to get things to the newsroom, to get supplies, to have a conversation with somebody, but they weren't working out of the newsroom every day. And some of the feedback that we heard from them was that they didn't feel connected. Is that they didn't feel connected, and we were kind of like, okay, like what does that mean? So the leadership team and I developed monthly gatherings, get-togethers, if you will, where literally our MMJs, some of them first jobs out of college, some of them on their second jobs, where they could meet each other and hang out, on work time. And so the first one that we did was Crocs and coffee. And so apparently Crocs are big or were big at the time, and so we had coffee and donuts in the newsroom and we told people to wear your Crocs. And so it was like a thing where we were 6 feet apart and we had our masks on, if you will. But, they liked the idea of being able to connect and have touch points, physical, colleagues outside of, just being on a Zoom call for the daily editorial meeting. And then every month we kind of did some other things, pumpkins and painting, or we painted pumpkins in October. And, there were a couple other things that we did, to not only increase the engagement, but, to hear from them. Like many of them stay at home in their apartment all day, except for when they go out to interview somebody. So they really needed the touch point, I do think there was a mental piece to that. There was definitely a mental health piece to, them needing to be with people, with colleagues, and not necessarily with them covering breaking news, or with them in a pressure cooker, deadline-driven environment.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. I mean, it's so much, first off, our well-being is so central in terms of those connections and having those relationships. And it sounds that you and your team, your leadership team, in terms of being very instrumental and being very thoughtful in regards to these mindful practices. I was like, because some of them I actually remember you posting, I believe, on LinkedIn. And I'm like, wait, I remember that one.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't know about the pumpkins. Like,
yes. Yes. So, I mean, I had a creative team and it was, October and Halloween and the dollar tree, had these foam pumpkins that you could decorate, like you could stick a note, like almost like a Mr. Potato Head, but, the
Yeah.
Dollar Tree had its own version. And so we bought a ton of those and paint and supplies and glue and, just let them really come in at their leisure. We had pizza for lunch, and it was a great way to engage them, let them take some steam off, have some fun, be creative. And they liked it. They liked it. They enjoyed it, and they asked for more. And I think we did something with stockings in December. So, so being creative and kind of listening to the room and helping them, through some of the challenges, I think those things were very successful for us.
Absolutely. I love the fact that it was just not one initiative.
Correct.
Or just even two initiatives. It sounds like something that it was very routine within your organization to be able to provide these services. So, which is just really phenomenal.
Right, and I don't want to cut you off, but I think it's also important to listen to the feedback and also recognize, right? Because a lot of times, in newsrooms, we just work. We work. And I think it's important for leaders to kind of recognize that so-and-so has been working all the time, head in the computer, very rarely gets up, that at some point he or she will reach a breaking point, right? Or they need to take a break. I remember when I was in New York when the pandemic first started, and my news director, we were just working, right? Because we couldn't go anywhere. Everything was on lockdown. And she finally said, you all need to take a break. Right? Like you need to take a couple days, you need to take a week. We will figure out, we will adjust, it was, she recognized that, because of what was happening in the pandemic and specifically in New York City, in New York, that we couldn't keep just working all the time 24/7 without like taking a break and unplugging. So it's also important for leaders to just kind of recognize that either something's off or something's amiss or something's odd with somebody, or just recognize, the way that they are working, they're going to burn themselves out.
Absolutely.
They're going to, not be well if they continue to, go at the same pace that they're going.
Yeah, that's first is really important, right? To really be observant as it relates to your team. I'm curious. When you mentioned feedback, how did you gather that feedback? Was the feedback of things that you've heard on the ground? Was it something that you and your organization put out and collected a survey? What did that look like?
So early on, it came from one-on-one conversations. And so I had two managing editors who managed the multimedia journalist group, which was the largest group. There were about 18 to 20 of them. And that was a lot of feedback that came from the managing editors one-on-ones with each of the folks who were assigned to them, is that they didn't feel engaged. Because we were in a point where we're working in COVID, we had a new format. There were lots of conversations about how are things going. So a new news format, MMJs were shooting differently, so no longer were they carrying a camera or working with a photographer, they were shooting on their phone. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of conversation throughout, about various things, but that often came up. One of the things that came out of that is our chief photographer would often do trainings of how to use the phone and the kit and all the equipment, to effectively get what we needed. So that also kind of came from you. So later on in the process, there was a survey, where we got some additional feedback, but some of these early things came from conversations.
Wow, that's fantastic. It sounds like there was really this range in terms of the team being on the ground, being able to make sure they're listening and observing in terms of those needs, and the fact that information, right, in terms of surveys were collected to be able to greater serve the team. I will say one of the things that was very interesting to me when I trained a public relations company, and they had these very detailed surveys on well-being. So unlike me asking all these different questions, they literally came in with concrete information. So it's wonderful to hear about the experiences that you had in regards to being able to gather that type of data, which is really important to understand, your team, but then also you cannot beat the one-on-ones and an observation, because you get to know the behavior of your team as well. So let's talk about resources.
Okay.
And it's interesting. I remember the days at A&T when we would talk all about Teachapalooza. I've never had a chance to go to one, but I think it's fantastic. And for those who may not know, the Teachapalooza is an event that is hosted by Poynter. And one of the things I value so much about Poynter is the training and the support that it provides. What is Poynter looking at this stage concerning mental health and the well-being of newsrooms?
Sure. So the Poynter Institute is a nonprofit. We teach journalists around the world leadership, ethics, and then the craft of journalism, i.e. storytelling, producing, photography, and the like. And a number of things that we've heard from people, be it news leaders, be it journalists on the ground, is that how do we address our mental health? How do we help our people who might be dealing with things that are or are not work-related? So one of the things, probably one of the most popular right now, is an online course called Work-Life Chemistry. And it was put together by my colleague, Kristen Hare, who actually taught it as a class, a workshop, and has now adapted it to an online module where, we hear about work-life balance, right? And this course is like, that doesn't exist, right? There really is no work-life balance. It's work-life chemistry. And it's a formula that you come up with where sometimes you might give one thing a little more than the other. And so I've taken the course, and part of it is you write down, the things that are important to you, and you come up with a score, if you will.
Wow.
And the score changes over time, based on what's important to you, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like probably very hard for people to give 50% work, and 50% outside of work, right? Just sometimes you give a little bit more to work. Sometimes you give, a little bit more to personal life. So this kind of takes away that you have to have this balance myth. And it is a formula, right? That based on the things that are important to you, is how you kind of prioritize that work-life chemistry.
Wow. So how can newsrooms take part in this?
So it's actually, so there are two ways. So one, they can request, that Kristen here, my colleague, come and present it and walk you through the workshop. But it's also now an online course. So people can go to poynter.org and search work-life chemistry, and they can enroll. And I think it's like $50. And there are 6 pieces of it, I believe, to come up with your work-life chemistry.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that because it really gives, first off, I often tell leaders it starts with you, right? And so what I love about this course is that it gives the tools to be able to I love the fact that you mentioned, work-life balance and giving ourselves permission where it may not be balanced and what that can look like over time and how it changes over time.
Sure.
So that's really phenomenal in terms of levels of support for not just the newsrooms in general, but also for leaders to really take advantage of.
Yes.
And to also be able to be ambassadors to share that with their team.
Yes.
One of the things I will admit that I love also about Poynter is the mental health section on the Poynter site. And it shares so many different stories in regards to well-being and things
Burnout.
to keep in mind. How should leaders leverage that in terms of being able to really serve their newsrooms?
Sure. Well, I think, obviously we want folks to sign up for our newsletters, right? Because a lot of that information comes in the form of newsletters. And then go to the site. And then I think it's important to kind of assess, your newsroom and your workforce and the situation there. and how can some of those things apply? We talk about burnout, in one of the articles written by one of my colleagues, it talks about the signs of burnout, right? And so if you're a manager and you're a leader and you notice, these signs, maybe it's worth a conversation, with said employee. How are things going? How's the work going? And then from there, you can, assess, okay, do I recommend that this person seek their professional medical provider, or maybe this person needs a change of pace, right? And so instead of them being, a producer on the show, in the pressure cooker, if you will, every day, let's give them a special assignment. Let's take them out of that and give them room to kind of really flex some muscles, use some creativity, and do another project, and then allow them to go back to work. So those are some of the things, that news leaders can do, from literally like reading the stuff that's there to actually implementing something that hopefully helps the employees' well-being.
Excellent. Wow. I really value that well-being strategy to kind of help serve them and their teams. Because the more resources you gather, the better you are in terms of being able to provide that information to your news organizations. I'm curious, since I have you here, Kerwin, is there anything new that's coming up for Poynter around the corner? I had to ask.
Absolutely. Yes. So, this news will be publicly announced soon. But the Poynter Institute and the Carter Center are partnering on a groundbreaking partnership, if you will, where we are, creating an online course that will be free to journalists on covering mental health. So we are currently in the throes of putting that together, and we're working with several journalists who have covered mental health, who have covered well-being, to put together a pretty robust online course that journalists can go to at any time if they have to cover trauma, for example, or if they have to cover suicide. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is, we are going to actually do some live training around mental health for journalists. So one component of that is, how do we cover said issue? And then there's this piece of, how do we protect our own mental health? How do we take care of ourselves? So we couldn't do just we couldn't just train journalists on covering mental health without addressing, you should also be aware of your mental health and protect yourself. So we're very excited about that. I was at the Carter Center where I saw you a couple weeks ago. Yes, to teach the fellows there about covering vulnerable populations, and we talked a little bit about solutions journalism. So we are really excited. This work is very timely and topical. And so, really kind of everything that happens, there's this conversation about mental health, right? His or her mental health, their mental health. So that's coming soon. So we're excited about that.
I am very, very excited. In full disclosure, I am on the advisory board of the Rosalind Carter Mental Health Journalism Fellowship. And Kerwin and I had a chance to see each other. I was so excited when I knew who was coming. I was like,
yes.
At the Carter Center just a few months ago, and I am super excited about this really impactful and meaningful partnership.
Sure.
So thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
levels of that.
Absolutely.
Since we're at the end of the show, I want to ask you this question, and I'm going to start asking every guest this question. What does compassionate leadership mean to you?
I think compassionate leadership means a leader who understands, a leader who cares, and a leader who motivates regardless of the situation.
Wow, very powerful. And you certainly are an incredible, compassionate leader. Kerwin, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Compassionate Newsroom podcast. Together we can transform workplace well-being in news. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with a colleague to help foster a supportive environment in the industry. And don't forget to subscribe and also visit our website for more resources at thecompassionatenewsroom.com.